Admonition the 25th. Live on site. In all the events that were to follow and precede our purchase of Dunnans, we gave ourselves an advantage at the outset. We decided to live on site. Seems odd, perhaps, to make a point of something so obvious, but I do so for two reasons. First, to list what makes living on site an essential, and second, to report an extraordinary conversation Sadie and I had with a third party in a wine bar in the hinterland between Notting Hill, Holland Park and Shepherd's Bush. If stuccoed terraces lined with freelanders can be termed a hinterland. The list begins with security and continues with security and ends with security. Not only does living on site provide the opportunity to defend your ruined building with big, fierce-looking, ferocious-sounding, jollop-swinging, too friendly dogs, but also to create visually arresting deterrents like my world-famous red jeans and stripy socks combo, or the face-painting, nappy-wielding hellions of our offspring quickly became. The aforementioned gate installations are a help, of course, and the nightly garden patrol to leak the dogs too, although, talking of evenings, we often found the deer rutting season put off potential unwelcome visitors anyway. Sometimes workmen and their vans and scaffolding were enough. Who'd persist confronted by the gap-toothed smile of a 6-foot sandy-haired bruiser like our Malcolm, especially dressed as he often was in grey, bobbly and cuffed tracksuit bottoms, and touting his very favourite impact hammer drill. If these were not enough, by living on site we always had the option of calling in the cavalry, namely a VBF or a McGuffey or even a KP. These were good first backstop options, but once the children had arrived, their trio of grandmothers proved entirely and regularly formidable. There is a second list, of course, of reasons to live on site. Items not linked to security in any way. They include the difficulty of managing projects remotely, the advisability of running a visitor attraction without the networking possibilities offered by being resident, and also the credibility committing to living on site gives you, as my colleague and friend Linda Henderson commented during the period I was publisher for forargyle.com, which she edited. Anyone who commits to living and working in Argyll should be applauded, supported, and given every benefit of the doubt for choosing this dreich and forbidding country as a home, particularly if they last more than a single winter. As for the extraordinary conversation mentioned as the second reason for this obvious admonition, well, we often met our great friend Liam for drinks after work, sometimes in Shepherd's Bush, sometimes in Notting Hill, not often between. That evening was different. Not only was Liam working in the offices of a local estate agent, but Sadie and I had been up the Portobello Road looking for dressings for the house we were marketing. Midpoint was Julie's, or Jules, or Juliet's wine bar. I forget which moniker graced its bijou exterior in the aforementioned hinterland. Liam had called Sadie to say one of the girls in the office had some interesting information we might like to hear firsthand, and did we want to meet? Of course, being game, and enjoying Liam's often acerbic, always witty company, we agreed. When we walked into the crowded, vibrant establishment, we found Liam at the bar, engrossed in conversation with a beautifully made-up but extremely gaunt lady called Trish, or Trisha, or even Trixie sometimes. Trisha was a colleague of his and also a Sadie's, and somewhat known to me too through various property shindigs in West London we managed to get invited to. And while Liam, Sadie and I epitomised a kind of creative bohemian chic, I like to think, Trish was the career estate agent, smartly besuited, well-spoken, precisely coiffured, adorned with restrained but chunky gold. She also had a wicked sense of humour, an encompassing manner, and a never-ending supply of duty-free lights from her pilot husband, who she referred to as Mr. Wings. Having greeted us as effusively, Trish smiled and said, "Now, you two, I have something to share. Now, as I was telling Liam this morning, after he told me about your news," her eyes were positively aglitter with excitement. "You see, I had a viewing last month with a dear friend of Mr. Wings, who was telling me about his boss, who is MD of this development company he works for. He was fizzing, just fizzing, I can't tell you. You see, him, his partner, his toy boy, well, they were looking for a nice place near Holland Park with views, as he was just received a raise. But that meant, rather to his chagrin, that he had become Mr. Boss's #1 man, his troubleshooter. Fixer, I think, is the term. Sounds rather gangsterish, doesn't it, darling? Anyway, it transpires he had been working on an acquisition in Scotland. Here my flagging interest picked up, as it was wont to do with our imminent move north and any mention of things Caledonian. It seems he'd spent the last 3 months not on some commercial development in the Docklands or wherever, which is what he was supposed to be doing, is paid to do. No, the MD had him working on a purchase of a castle in Scotland, for him personally. Not for the company, but for him and his wife, privately. Would you believe it? We shook our heads in shared wonderment. But get this, it's weirder than just a castle in Scotland. It was your castle, the one you were buying. His boss was the chap who outbid you. And my guy, he's called Mark, was fizzing because apparently the MD called it all off as the project was too big for a holiday home. Can you believe it? We shook our heads in mute wonderment. So he's walking about this pristine, and I mean pristine apartment, declaiming in quite Shakespearean terms, spittle spraying, arms waving, nearly knocking over vases, rucking up carpets, about how much time he'd spent and the money his MD had spent, and that it all took to put the mockers on the thing. Now get this, was just one 5-minute telephone conversation. He pulled, just like that, pulled all the negotiation, all the effort, the offer, the lot, and in Scotland. What would that have cost? This MD, who has a rep as one of the most hard-headed, indefatigable developers in London, the man's got millions, and he's put off by an effing phone call? Amazing! Absolutely amazing. No wonder Mark was pissed off. He just heard the deal was off, and he was spitting. Seems architects were involved, and contractors, and everything. There was a rather breathless pause. What did one say to that? Tricia took a drag of her cigarette, deciding it was done, stubbed it out, and then continued. He'd made an offer on the flat, though, which is something. Did, Mark say anything about what was mentioned in the phone call? Nothing, darling. As he said, it's inexplicable. His boss, well, he wouldn't give a fig about anything anyone said. He's the proverbial steamroller. No, Mark got the impression, and this is entirely entre nous, Tricia leaned inwards, that somehow local feeling was too high. Local feeling? I asked incredulously. Local feeling. Well, she glanced at me knowingly. It is quite near Glasgow. Glasgow? What on earth has being near Glasgow got to do with local feeling? Tricia looked down shiftily and mouthed, rather than said, gangs. Sadie and I looked at one another. Knives? We stared at Tricia blankly. The Ouija mafia? We looked at Tricia aghast, both the phrase but also the implication. We'd both immediately thought of the captain and his tete-a-tete with us at the Glendale Hotel. But gangs? That seemed both far-fetched and probably more than a decade out of date. Well, I said, feeling this was an decidedly odd experience, not so much an out-of-body experience as an out-of-Scotland experience. It seemed so unreal. I decided not to address the wholly egregious assumption about the Jewel of the Clyde, and said instead, as a distraction, we're going to build a shed. A shed? Asked Trish, nonplussed. Yes, a big red shed, Sadie chimed in, chuckling, which is going to be our temporary accommodation for a year or two while we restore the castle. We'll be on site all the time with dogs. And friends? Big friends, said Sadie. They'll be okay. They have some very big friends, said Liam reassuringly to Tricia. I'll visit too. Evidently Liam liked our big friends, whoever they were. Tricia looked at us all as if we were quite mad and shook her head, then, evidently having decided the subject would bear no further fruit, exclaimed, Right-o, who is for another bottle of the good stuff?